Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of Pillow Talk with Core. My name is Eamon McGann and I'm the Client Solutions Director at Core, and I will be your host today. Today I'm joined by Kat, who is a Microsoft Solutions Specialist at Core, and together we're going to be talking about how to bring people through technology-led change projects. So Kat, if I could, can I ask you to give a background and introduction to who you are and what you do at Core?
Yeah, so my name is Kat Greenan and I'm a Microsoft Solutions Specialist. I've been working at Core for about just over 4 years now, and my role is primarily customer facing. So I'll be spending time with our customers either through workshops or through training to really help them get the best use out of the technology and solution that they've purchased.
Cool, thank you, Kat. So Kat, as you know, we're going to focus this episode around particularly the report that Core have done recently on the sleep patterns of IT professionals. And particularly the skew we want to take today is, something very close to yourself. You work with customers, as do I, at that really early stage of understanding what they do with technology and getting the most from the technology. And I think we're both well aware of IT professionals and the kind of strain they're under. The report that we did recently really does show a number of the key strains, but certainly what I'm seeing is that the remote working requirement really in the last 2 or 3 months has put considerable strain on the kind of guys and girls that we're talking to on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. From what we're seeing with customers, it's almost back to front. So they would originally have a 6-month adoption and change management plan. And then now, because of this situation, they're turning on the technology and kind of trying to backtrack a little bit as well. So it's even more crucial now that we kind of work with our customers who are in that situation, like most are, to make sure that they're doing it as best as they can.
Yeah, it's the backtrack piece, which is the tough piece, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just a bit of housekeeping, by the way. This is a report that Core carried out, an independent report carried out by Savanta. For me, it's an excellent report. There's some really amazing insights in that report, and I'd highly recommend you download the report from our website. The link is on screen right now, so please do download the report. Kat, just to kind of add a little context, you are front and foremost out with customers on a daily basis. You're leading a lot of the collaboration side of Microsoft 365 and how we help customers adopt. So ensuring success and taking customers through that adoption cycle is a key part of your role at Core. And I think as we get towards the end of the session today, I'll ask you maybe just to summarize what you think are the best practices around adoption. But as a lead into that, some of the context to what we do and some of the key changes we're seeing, at the beginning of the year, we all as a team sat down and looked at the trends, what was coming in 2020, where we would focus and so on. Now, some of those trends have changed very dramatically, or if anything, they've accelerated dramatically in the last 3 or 4 months. But one of the trends that really I still think is first and foremost and at the heart of what we do is the digital workspace and the single pane of glass. The research that we've seen, Gartner do their yearly research circle research. Back a couple of years ago, the move to the cloud was all around just trying to move workloads, change costs, and so on. The 2019 report had quite a significant shift that CIOs were really embracing new ways of working. That was the key message. So we're seeing that, and I think from your perspective, what is the shift that you're seeing? What are you seeing customers adopt? And I think from a culture perspective, what is that impact? How are you seeing the cultural impact of organizations as they take on new ways of working and some of the key core elements of Microsoft 365?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things in there in terms of the when we're speaking to customers, some of the main trends. One of the kind of key ones is the shift in the generations that we're working in the workforce right now. So there's 5 generations in the workforce at the moment, and all of those generations do expect different things from technology, and they definitely work in different ways, and the technology literacy is also different. So that's really impacting on how people are actually working. If we think about the younger generations that are coming into the workforce, they tend to prefer a more chat-based working style rather than formal email or phone calls. So we're seeing a little bit of a shift in kind of patterns in terms of how people work. there's also things that we use in our day-to-day lives to communicate. So the way that we communicate is a bit different than we did even just 5 years ago. We're using, different methods like emojis, chat, WhatsApp. We're using all of these quick types of communication in our day-to-day lives. And so the thought is, and the idea is, why not bring that into our working lives as well? So that's, I think, one of the biggest ones is the generation shift that we're seeing that's impacting the way that we're working.
Yeah. And I think from my perspective, just, culture and an understanding how people adopt stuff. I mean, Teams is probably the heart of it, a lot of what you and I do on a day-to-day basis, and seeing how organizations are looking at Teams and seeing it as more than just a Skype replacement or whatever. And I know we'll come back to that in a wee while, but even at a more close to home, I mean, I've got 3 children and they're all homeschooling at the minute. They've all got their devices. And I was kind of taken aback culturally how quickly that, one, they've adapted to that this is how they now learn, and I mean it's such a change when you think about classroom-led training or learning, I should say. Sorry, to see them now, logging on in the morning. They've been pretty good. Keep an eye on them, as you can probably expect. But they log on. They're all using Teams type tools, no problem, and they seem to adopt very quickly. But what really surprised me was, from a security element point of view, all 3 of my kids use Windows Hello, so they look at me when I'm typing passwords and think I'm from the Ark. So just the adoption of the fact that passwordless type security is something that they do natively. And my point, I suppose, is these are the next generation coming into the workforce in X number of years' time, but yet they expect passwordless, they expect these tools. So I think we're seeing that shift, and preparing organizations for it now is pretty critical. I think Teams I've just mentioned, and I know sometimes people think that's the only thing you and I talk about, but it's worth in context when we talk about culture to talk about what impact it's had. And if we look at what it empowers, Teams, it empowers productivity, it empowers, messaging and a replacement for Skype, which some people see it as that's been really what it is. But last year, I personally worked on a project with the team where we did a nationwide rollout for a very large organization. And for them, Teams was really about, much more than just a voice instant messaging piece. It was a piece where, a whole set of business use cases kind of evolved out of the usage of Teams. So the innovation we're seeing is pretty amazing. So from your perspective, I think where you seen that innovation, and where you seen the excitement, and I suppose how we supporting customers as they adopt things like Teams.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Definitely. We're seeing a huge kind of improvement, especially with collaboration. So a lot of customers that we're speaking to, their collaboration was lacking, just in the sense of they would use a tool that's maybe not built for that purpose, like email. Email still has its place in communication and collaboration, definitely. But in terms of a group work, kind of getting things done, it's not really ideal. So moving that type of conversation into something like Teams, we can see our replies. We're not forgetting to copy someone in. There's no misinformation. Everyone's kept in the loop and up to date. We can work on our files. It's just a huge improvement over something like using email. A really good example of that is a customer where they were talking about how this could impact their induction for new project staff members. So if you have a new project lead that comes in halfway through a project, which sometimes that often happens, they don't have to sift through their email, getting the inbox and spending hours and hours on end trying to piece together information. It's very much they open up Teams, they've got their project team, they can see who's in the team, who's involved, all the conversations, the tasks, the files, and they're kind of instantly kept in the loop and know what's going on in the project. So even just in terms of reducing induction time, it can be a huge productivity gain.
Yeah, I think for me, putting a practical spin on that, we do have to live in too many technologies, whether it's jumping from Teams to Outlook to whatever. And certainly I know the driver from Microsoft is that Teams will be the single pane of glass, and that it will be the place where you can access all your files, open your line of business apps, do your conversations and so on. But as a subpart, we can paint a very big picture part of Teams. But for me, culturally, one of the things that I picked up on, and you were definitely, many years ago, when back in 2017 when Teams kind of started, you were by far the first champion in core in our use. And one of the things that I spotted you culturally doing very early on was not just assuming people know how to use instant messaging. So kind of message etiquette that sits within how you respond properly, so that it does become somewhere that it becomes natural to respond to email, to respond to conversations in a thread rather than in email. That's something that you've always championed, what is good etiquette and so on. How important is that to adoption and just what looks like very simple but yet very fundamental elements to using it properly?
Yeah, I would totally agree. There is a couple of key factors that are important when you are using it. So we have seen it before where customers and sometimes they will turn on Teams out of, they have a requirement for it, but there's nothing else. There's no kind of importance on best practices and the tips. And what we ended up finding was customers and their end users would use it less and less because it just got convoluted with information that's not needed. Even the really simple example of creating a new team, not being able to understand why you should create a team and what's the purpose of a team. It has to have a real use case behind it, and if that's not been talked through with the users and they don't understand that, then we have lots and lots of teams created, duplicates, we have teams that aren't used, and from an end user perspective, it's just it's not something you want to open up Teams and just see a massive list of different things that are going on. So it can really deter people from using it. From an IT management perspective, you're creating a new group every time you're creating that team. So it's creating all of this stuff in the background, and it's very hard to come back from that. So even creating a new team, you should be telling your users why they should create one and some best practices around that. So I think that's really, really important to have that in place before even opening this out to all of the end users.
Yeah, I think for me, a lot of what you're talking about is it. I heard somebody make a statement in the past that's saying, you never need to be trained how to use Facebook, and that's a fair point. Facebook is pretty obvious stuff, as is Teams. Teams is fairly simple to use, and so it should be. However, the devil's in the detail, isn't it, in terms of successful adoption, ensuring that, the classic example for me is until, and as obvious as this is to me now, in retrospect, until you pointed out to a number of us a couple of years ago that when we're replying to a message, we should be doing it within the context of the message. Otherwise, we have this long string and suddenly becomes more unwieldy and start reverting back to email when we should have stayed in Teams. That small tidbit genuinely was what was a nirvana moment for me, as simple as it was. Even announcements. Only recently I was on a training session that you ran. I was in the background and I was with a customer and you showed some of the announcement features. And there was genuine kind of awe that feature existed, despite the fact that particular customer was using it for 6 or 7 months. So I think definitely ensuring that people can do that they understand the governance elements without it being OTT. We want Teams to be rolled out. So I think that kind of leads me to a different topic, which is, Teams, again, we're champions of it. It brings out loads of benefits, and we definitely can talk a lot about the benefits, but without being overly negative, what do you feel are the key risks and pitfalls, and how would you mitigate those when you talk about remote working in Teams?
So the biggest one kind of leads on quite nicely from my last point, which is talking about use cases. So Teams is filled with features, it's filled with buttons that do things, which is great. But really the value from Teams is understanding how it's going to be used and the benefit it will bring to the business. So what we like to do, and a way to kind of really make sure that it's not just being, Teams created for the sake of it and that kind of mess that I talked about earlier, is to actually sit down and do a kind of workshop with the departments to find out how they work at the minute, what tools they use, show them Teams and actually see, okay, how would you create your team? What would be useful for you? And what problem is this going to solve for you? Is it going to save you time? Is it going to, really understand from your users how they would use it? Because that's one really nice way to find problems, but also solutions. So for one team, it will work different to another. So it's the use cases is an exercise that we do with customers, and it's one of the very first steps that we recommend when deploying something like Teams. There's other things that we're going to mention in the tips at the end, but one other thing that I like to stress is the importance of having champions, because we have spoken to organizations before where they have had IT to, manage absolutely everything and get the message across, do the communication, the training, and it just gets very, very busy for the IT team, and very stressful. And so having champions, one person or two people per department to actually own teams for that department, help with training, help with best practices, it really reduces the stress on like a service desk. So that's another thing I would definitely recommend is define your use cases and use champions. And your champions can actually help define those use cases with you. So you can sit down and ask them, how does your department work? What's going to be useful for you? And those are just the key steps that I would the first ones I would take.
I think for me that what they highlight, and again, haven't seen this in action, is when we have those use cases and we have a clear understanding of how it should be used. And that's either communicated via video, via training, via little snippets, whatever we get that messaging out, which we'll probably come back to. But for me, it's avoiding what naturally people do, which is they'll use it for a while, they'll fiddle about with it, to excuse the phrase, and they'll go back to old practices. And a lot of money, effort, and then we go back to old practices. For me, one of the killers, if you like, is file and file usage. People get very comfortable about how they manage files. I know we made a really strong commitment in court to use Teams as the file transfer mechanism. So, and you can probably correct me if I'm wrong here, Kat, but the last time I probably sent you or anybody an email with a file attached was a long time ago. If it's the last resort, I'll use email.
Yeah.
But other than that, I'm using the Teams mechanism to transfer. And that is for me a mixture of how good the tech is, but actually how good the adoption cycle of explaining why that worked. The fact we could co-author from within Teams, even on a one-to-one basis. In fact, you and I, not even within a team, just in a one-to-one chat, can open a file and co-author through Teams. So they're simple and nice to have, but it's more about ensuring the long-term success. And something you picked on actually there a second ago is a lot of our customers have rolled it out. They've had to backtrack, as I think you said at the beginning. And many of them have come back to us and said two things in my experience. One, it's out there, we have to really accelerate it over the last few months. But they're becoming a pinch point, and they're having to do lots and lots of stuff. But also, have they got best practice of advice? So many have asked for support. And I think the key message tended to be that they're concerned about, one, the short-term support to keep teams and whatever tech they're using moving successfully, but also the key desire that it doesn't die in 3 months' time, that it is successful in the long term. So
you don't want to see your usage going up and then dropping down.
So from that point of view, adoption planning and having an adoption plan in place is a step we put in place. But assuming we're helping customers, which we do, put adoption plans in place. From your experience, Kat, kind of what's the critical things that they achieve as a result of a good adoption plan? What are the metrics, if you like, the businesses can see from having a good adoption plan in place?
Yeah, there's an exercise that we do with customers, which is really defining if they use Teams properly and deployed it properly throughout the organization, what kind of KPIs are we looking to hit? And we have gone through the entire life cycle of a customer where they've hit those KPIs, which has obviously made them and their senior management very, very happy. But there's things in there like massively reducing operating costs. So obviously this was pre-COVID, but there was travel, time, expenses. There was a housing association I was speaking to, and one of the end users said that she works with a partner and she went to visit that partner bi-weekly for over 2 years, and it took her 2 hours each day traveling, or each time that she went. And she said, I could just do this meeting through Teams. I just could save so much time and money, because the key thing was the rapport had already been built with that partner. They've been working together for years. They didn't really need to meet every time. So even a really small example like that, it can really help reduce the amount of times that you're having to travel, especially things like staff training. So we speak to a lot of learning and development teams, and one of their things is to improve their onboarding experience for staff, and also training. And this is the same in universities. that we speak to. So being able to do a training session over Teams, because sometimes it is hard to get everyone in the office at the same time. You can record the session, you can send it out, you make sure that all staff members are getting the same training, the same message is being sent, and you know everybody's kind of covered in terms of training. So there's a few ones in there that we've kind of experienced, and that's because it's been adopted properly and people haven't just had a look at the shiny buttons and not looked at it again.
Okay, cool. I think the one kind of final piece I'd add to that is the methodology that's used. I know at Core we're very, very heavy advocates of ProSci, and we are ProSci practitioners. And I think for me, when Core started doing ProSci a number of years ago, the thing that really clicked for me about ProSci was it's what Prince does for a project, ProSci does for a change project. And just to give a kind of brief example, for me, for example, project managers are well used to sitting in project management meetings weekly, monthly, whatever it is, and talking about success of a project in terms of milestones and activities and showing how commercially or milestone-wise or task-wise a project is being achieved. So you can say you're 80% through, great, we're on track. Change management is so it's so open in comparison that being able to quantify it is difficult. And one of the things in ProSci are a number of the tools. So there's a whole set of tools, PCT tools and so on, that allow us to measure the success. So when we're sitting in those monthly meetings, we can quantitatively say to the project team that yes, the change is happening and we are clear the change is happening, as opposed to just saying we think it's happening. Look, people are using the tools. And yes, we can log on to Office 365 and see the amount of use, but that doesn't actually tell us whether people are using it and liking it. So some of the ProSci metrics that are included we think are vital to really make sure adoption is understood and really working, and not something that's straw man, finger in the air. Yeah, people are using it, it's great, because that doesn't guarantee you 6 months down the line. Okay, Kat, just to conclude, I think it might be really helpful if maybe you can give us your top 6 best practices around how we can ensure and help people adopt projects.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess the first one is very important that I mentioned earlier. So defining the use cases is definitely an important step that I've kind of ran through. Another one in there is a key sponsor. So when we talk about change in an organization, it always comes from the top. So having an executive stakeholder to influence the organization, to send out the communication, to say, yes, this is what we're doing, it's a business decision, it really influences people to be on board with it. Champions, I've mentioned, are important in order to scale. It's going to help your service desk team or your IT teams. They're going to be your ears on the ground and really help get this out into the other departments. We then have communication, which is obviously very important. People need to know what's happening, how it's actually going to affect them. So when we talk about communication, we always say with them, what's in it for me? So when we're talking to the HR team, we're not telling them about teams and channels and buttons. We're telling them we're going to improve their onboarding experience for their staff members. If we're talking to marketing, we're going to tell them that we can help them easily track social media or plan events. So it's that type of language that we're using with communication. Training is very much the same. When we're training, it's on best practices, how to use something, not necessarily the buttons, but those little tips and tricks that really help people get the best use of it. And again, focusing on what's in it for them. How is it going to save them time in their day? That's going to help people want to use it and be more open-minded. One other key point is resistance management. So you are going to get resistance. Not everybody is going to want to change. So one thing that we do recommend is having a bit of a resistance management plan to kind of understand what resistance you're probably going to get. I don't have time. My manager's not using it, so why should I? If it's not broken, why fix it? All of these kind of things that we tend to see. Have a plan and an approach, what you would do in that situation. How do you actually overcome that resistance? And that's an exercise that, again, we do with our customers. The last big one on there, I think, is rewards and recognition. We mentioned earlier about we don't want the trail to drop off with your usage. So rewards and recognition is a really nice way, once you've rolled this out and people start using it, to actually kind of get people back into using it and make sure that you're reinforcing the change. So there's things that we've done, like competitions through Teams, fun stuff, creating teams for more social events and things like that always help. But recognition is important. So, saying thank you to a champion for doing a really great job that month, or, if someone's really transformed their team using Teams, then having that kind of communication going out to recognize that that person has done really well. So I think those are the key steps, and there's ways to make sure that you're reinforcing that change and it's not just a one-off thing.
Thank you. Cheers, Kat. So thanks, Kat. I think there's a lot in there, and I know specifically getting into topics around some of the best practices is something that CORE will follow up on, so please stay tuned for that. I think what we've covered really is that technology-led change projects are challenging. Having a good plan, it doesn't need to be war and peace, but having a good adoption plan and a good method. Very few people out there will start a project without some form of prints or using some methodology. Let's make sure we have a good method, and ProSci is clearly our recommended method, and it's one that we've been doing for many years. And having that in place will help guide and ensure success. But I think ultimately we're recognizing that it's a big time of change. Some really cool tools out there, but we've got stretched IT out there, and it's how do we help and sustain the adoption and not just a short-term gain. So, I think some really, really good points. So thanks for that, Kat. Just in terms of potential next steps, one thing I do want to highlight that when we talk about having to adopt and get stuff out there rapidly, one of the programs CORE put together recently to support our customers is CORE's Rapid Enablement Solution. So we'll put a link on the page right now, and hopefully that will provide you some information and some guidance around how you can rapidly deploy and how CORE can support you on that. I'd also like to highlight that the report that we've referenced a few times is a really interesting read, and it covers the angles from both the CIO and the IT professional. So some really good information in there. So again, the link's on the screen right now. Please do download that. So thanks a million for your time today. Really interesting stuff. So thank you for me, and thanks for watching.